Good afternoon, welcome. This is vk3sl and we're here for the late afternoon, evening Corona missions, test missions on 160 metres in the narrowband FM mode. Welcome to these meanderings. It's a beautiful day outside and I'm not intending on staying in the Zoom. I'll monitor from outside, so I think we'll just have something sort of longish and let nature take its course. I've been going through tapes. I've been looking for Who Pays the Piper. It's a poem set to music. We were talking about it last night on the missions, and I can't find my copy. So, Frank, if you're listening, and if you do have a copy of that, it would be most interesting to have that as a part of the program, future program. We'd love to hear it again. I'll keep looking, but there are literally hundreds of cassettes here, and it's ridiculous. But while going through the cassettes, I did find something that said The History of Radio. 2 cassettes. I have no idea when I dubbed these. I probably got them off Mainstream Wireless back in the 1990s, 80s or 90s, maybe even later, I'm not sure. So they deserve a listen, I think. I haven't really tested them. I just had a very quick sample to make sure it had program on it, but the labels are extant, so I'm just going to go with the flow, and we'll just let this be our program for today. And a word of, just to recommend Mr. Long's missions tonight on 147.475. Have a listen to that. It's always outstanding. And that's from 9:30. So good on you, Chris. And look forward to it. Right, so I'm going to head back outside and enjoy what's left of the day. Beautiful day today, and no other news to report really. Got the trough line working quite well now. I've done a bit more work on that today, and it's quite stable. It's a great receiver. It's an old Leak Trough Line 2 from about 1958, an FM receiver, and it's good, great sound. All right, I think we are set. I think we're set, ready to go. I'm not going to worry about Dolbys and things like that. We'll just give as many highs as we can. If there's a bit of hiss along the way, I think we all know what to expect. And without any further ado, this is vk3sl testing. I'll just set this in motion.
Is there anyone on the air?
The first tremulous cry of the wonder child of that inspired mind, wireless, was born.
Autobahn 2, Oberhausen Richtung Hannover, Auto Richtung Köln, Frankfurt in Richtung Basel. Here we go.
Are you sitting comfortably? Two sides.
You are listening.
Vous écoutez.
Vous êtes à l'écoute. You're listening. You're listening. Vous écoutez.
Vous avez entendu.
You're listening.
You have heard. You have just heard.
You're listening. Bonjour, vous écoutez France Inter.
Écoutez un disque de grande musique.
Des musiques, la nature et les hommes. BM Studio, le journal 2013.
You're listening to The Great Marconigram on Radio National.
For good or ill, radio was the first true mass medium of the 20th century, and its many forms and modes have attracted critics, cultural theorists, and cut-up artists keen to interrogate or reconstruct its meaning.
This original bip of the radio, I don't know how it was. It would be like looking for the Big Bang real sound. And I think this establishes an interesting connection with our imagination and our turning some sounds into icons, really.
Marconi may have been the father of radio, but that first message across the Atlantic in 1901 has been described as the mother signal. The phrase was coined by Franco Minganti of the University of Bologna. He also described radio as the medium for the grain of the human voice. He's talking here to Robin Ravlich.
Just remembering one of basic elements in Freud's theory about our relation with the mother, that is the apparition, disparition of mothers from the eyes of the newborn baby. And again, I think looking for radio signals and clear stations has to do with, I called it in finding, or who knows, not finding what we are looking for. That is, the comfort, finding voices we can recognize.
City news.
Another news. Bad news for the banks.
Next here on BFBS, we have the news headlines, and then sports.
My memories go back when I was very, very little boy, and I would have my aunt who owned a radio, a very old one, and I would go up to her apartment and stick to this strange and curious set. Of course, the most fruitful moment was probably the night, not only because you could keep the lights off in your room and the only light was the light of the radio dial, but also because somehow signals were more dense, more meaningful, more exciting at night.
Radio Antillas Internacional.
Radio Svizzera Internazionale.
Radio Nacional.
Radioscopie de
Radio Polonia.
Radio Message.
Radio News.
Radio Club.
Radio Club.
Radio Journal.
Radio Budit. Radio
I want you to imagine a man has just bought a new radio.
Getting lost in noise, in unclear messages and sounds.
And he's one of these typical dial twisters who is never satisfied with one program.
What I call the babel of voices coming out of radio while, turning the dial, looking for nothing particular. The pleasure in that experience was exactly the pleasure of passing, of traveling through the airwaves. So it was somehow an education to face what you don't know. You need to be an adventurer to, find pleasure in meeting something you don't know yet.
Around the world and around the world planet and across the universe. Information in all corners. Total.
But really, he doesn't care what program he gets. He just loves to turn on the radio.
Take a look at how this mythic sound, or the sound and the voice of radio, are in fact internalized by quite a lot of musicians who in fact found in radio a very important expressive medium. So they imitated through their compositions the output of radio, the materiality of the radio voice. Radio has an enormous potential for producing food for thought and time for thinking, really. I should also say that the history of radio and the technology has always introduced the notion of montage, editing in the first place, and montage, which of course introduces the immediate notion of manipulation of reality. So it's not only a documentary medium, but it's a creative medium.
I've seen the promised land, but neither can I find words to accurately describe what happened at Countdown Zero. For what occurred in the early morning dawns at that tropical island paradise lies shielded in a frenzy of light, sound, heat, and flame, which my mind could never comprehend.
Technology.
Would it work? Had we forgotten or miscalculated? Then the blinding flash, the deathly quiet, the terrific roar, our stunned, bewildered silence at what we had seen.
Memory.
We stood knee-deep in garbage while reaching for the moon.
democracy. The choice is yours.
The collapse of the totalitarian Soviet system has convinced the proponents of the New World Order that a new age has arrived.
Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
There must be a different way. It's not just a question of Africa. If you look at what's happening to Russia, it's a disaster.
I know now how a mouse feels. Caught in a trap. Finish it up.
An excerpt from The 20th Century and the Dream by Kathy Peters. I'm Tony Baldwin, and you're receiving The Great Marconigram on Radio National.
Hello, 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 and how.
Now you can hear every program in your own home with such fidelity, clarity, and perfection of tone as you would expect only in the studio itself.
Four bedrooms now have a radio, it's true.
And now they're in the kitchen from all to
For decades, people listened to the wireless in family groups. The golden age of radio lasted nearly 3 decades.
Mother's buying,
Dad and Mother's buying,
everyone's buying more radios.
Radio did everything we expect of TV now. Coronations, disasters, war, sport, advertising, plays, music, comedy, nature. Some things TV still can't get right, like cricket commentary. But we'll come to that later.
Fireside Theatre. The allure of radio drama.
Wait a minute, something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles are spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission.
In 1938, Orson Welles scared the living daylights out of radio listeners in New York with his dramatization of the War of the Worlds, broadcast on the CBS network. People who tuned in after the opening announcement thought it was the real thing, and believing Martians really had landed in New Jersey, they fled their homes in panic. Such was the power of the wireless in the 1930s.
Oh, it's just waking up.
last night I lay sleeping, baby.
Radio's had many bizarre moments. The ABC's Double J, as it was in the 1970s, tried to do everything differently, even radio drama. The veteran newsreader James Dibble was engaged to narrate a psychedelic road play. What's Rangoon to you is Grafton to me, the diary of a day and night behind the wheel between Brisbane and Sydney, with only a radio to keep the drivers sane.
When the night comes down around your collar and the road starts coming up through your headlights, familiar landscape suddenly isn't.
It's real time in the land of legends.
vk3sl.
Someone out there, Henry Lawson's taking another swing.
It was the radio.
Inside the car, I'm making final adjustments to the viewing screen. A Holden windshield where tonight's travel thriller is being shown at 70 mile per hour. Not so much the cars that ate Paris.
Or the jellyfish that followed Coffs Harbour.
It was going to be a good trip. I pressed my foot against the roof and screamed.
The birth of radio drama.
If we offend, it is with our goodwill.
To write a play for effect by sound only.
I'm going to find the uniquely Australian rhythm and play that.
The search for the uniquely Australian rhythm, part 1.
There'd never been before anything which people had had to take in by their ears only.
I'm now 1 foot away from the dummy's left ear, 45 degrees off axis.
I want a bit of romance in my life.
What are you doing?
Don't worry, it's safer than it looks.
Tell me about the birds and the bees.
All right. Now lift up my jumper. You can have a look, then a quick feel, right?
Yeah, all right.
Like 'em?
They're okay.
And I'm now standing a foot away from the dummy's head and facing its nose.
Do you really love me?
Of course I love you. I sleep with you, don't I?
You need a little bit of discipline.
Of course, really, this is an entirely new medium.
I suppose I lost sight of the fact that while we are part of the universe, we have to act as though we weren't.
This play became the first listening play.
Don't you know how mad that was?
Really needs something written specially for it.
Well, I should hope that I still have some ideals left.
And maybe I hope in some foolish way that she'll be listening and we'll find each other again.
Put in 50 cents. That wasn't worth it, Di.
Hey, is that all? Yeah, but I paid 60.
I always come home. It's just that some nights it's a different home.
Don't worry, your neat little black moustache is still in situ.
We'll have to wait until next year for you to get it up.
It's a love story and I'd like to tell you about it.
Things happen fast in a time war zone. I gotta go.
You get born, get married, have a family, die. Is that enough? Shut up, Mum. And if that budgie shits in Emma's hair again, there'll be real trouble.
A selection of ABC-produced drama from the 50s until now.
On Radio National, this is the Great Marconi Grant.
The real power of radio, however, came when politicians learned to speak directly to people.
It must be true. The power of radio propaganda.
We have, in the darkest moments of our national trials, retained our faith in our own ability to master our own destiny. Fear is vanishing. Confidence is growing on every side. Renewed faith in the vast possibilities of human beings to improve their material and spiritual status through the instrumentality of the democratic form of government. That faith is receiving its just reward. For that, we can be thankful to the God who watches over America.
Franklin D. Roosevelt was the master of the power of radio. His weekly presidential address sounds like a speech to us now, but in the 1930s, it was his fireside chat. Radio has a power that can be perverted. The Nazis' propaganda minister, Goebbels, loved that power.
Politischen Erfolgsbahn nun im Begriff stand, die ganze Macht und die ganze Verantwortung in seine zwar jungen, aber starken Hände.
Germany calling, Germany calling, Germany calling. Here are the Reichsender ambush, Station Bremen and Station DXB on the 31-meter band. You are about to hear our news in English. The diplomatic
Don't forget Lord Haw-Haw. He was widely listened to in Britain, widely talked about, not necessarily believed, but he was a figure whom everybody had heard of. And in the really bad, dark days in 1940 to 1942, there were serious thoughts here about the possibility of jamming him or in some way getting him off the airwaves, because he was definitely undermining morale.
Whereas only England and France could be interested in causing trouble in this region, which is so important for German supplies.
How did international stations turn into propaganda media? Julian Hale is the author of the book Radio Power.
The people that really had the first idea to make international use of broadcasting were, ironically enough, the Russians. At the time, this is soon after the revolution, Lenin himself developed inside Russia a system which would give the international impetus, if you like, to the international proletariat message. to all, to all, to all, which as they used to put out at the beginning of their signals. But of course this was really telegraph in the first instance. Marconi hadn't really developed the technology until the early 20s. The Russians did in fact develop an international radio service as early as 1925. But then they really got overtaken in the 30s, in particular as far as international broadcasting systems were concerned by the Germans.
Und das, wenn diese gequälten Kreaturen kein Recht und keine Hilfe selbst finden können, sie beides von uns bekommen werden.
They really saw that radio was the most effective means to influence masses of people. People were frightened when they meant them to be frightened. People were uplifted when they meant them to be uplifted. You were hypnotized, if you like, into believing certain things.
Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit upland. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty. So bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
Winston Churchill was a very artful broadcaster. Some of his radio talks were recorded when he was busy elsewhere, by an actor so good at mimicking his style, nobody knew the difference. Another actor revealed Britain's greatest secret propaganda weapon.
This is Colonel Britain speaking. All over Europe, the V sign is seen by the Germans, and it's beginning to play on their nerves. They see it chalked on the pavements, penciled on posters, scratched on the mudguards of German cars. Men salute each other with the V sign separating their fingers. Now, there's a V sound. Morse is the universal language of telegraphy. And here's the letter V, the sign of victory in Morse. Have you got it? When you knock on the door, there's your knock. If you call a waiter in a restaurant, call him like this. Hey, garçon? Well, there's the V sign in sound. Your sign. The sign of resistance to tyranny.
And today the position is that the German Wehrmacht stands between the Soviet hordes and the British Army. If the Wehrmacht were to give up, if the resistance were to finish, then I can only say that you, the British people, would have to make your own terms with the Bolsheviks. And what sorry terms there would be. And therefore, in conclusion, I would only say, just make sure that the end of this world war is not the beginning of a greater world war than you have ever imagined to be possible.
This is a test transmission from vk3sl.
You may not hear from me again for a few months. I say, es lebe Deutschland, Heil Hitler, and farewell.
When Lord Haw-Haw, real name William Joyce, made his farewell broadcast, he was obviously under the influence. It didn't save him from the gallows, however, at the end of the Second World War. But his warning about the Bolsheviks was perhaps the first propaganda broadcast of the Cold War.
This is Radio Free Europe, the voice of freedom calling the captive countries behind the Iron Curtain, speaking to them in their own languages in more ways than the obvious. American propaganda of hope, sizzling through the air with messages, musical and spoken, that the communists don't want their slaves to hear. Messages that should be a warning to the Reds that all their carefully canned dogma can't quite blot out the simple human urge to think and say what you please.
This is Radio Moscow, and here is the news read by Joe Adamov. First, the headlines.
This is London. BBC World Service. The news, read by John Toohey.
This is the Voice of America broadcasting to Czechoslovakia. The Vietnamese government has issued a statement saying China's ruling circles have begun a war of aggression against Vietnam.
Vietnam says China has begun an aggressive war along the whole of their border.
This is Radio Tirana. The propaganda of the apologists of the bourgeoisie boast that the present-day bourgeois society is a society of equal opportunity. But the reality of the capitalist country...
We're glad that you could be with us today for Words of Hope. If you feel that we can be of any help to you in your spiritual pilgrimage, we would consider that a high privilege. Write to us today at Words of Hope, Box 1706, Grand Rapids, Michigan, zip 49501.
Radio's power can be very direct, uplifting or downgrading, offering hope or hate. One of radio's lowest moments came in 1994 when Rwandans were told to go out and murder their neighbors. The station was RTLM.
No, he's running out of what to say because he's doing it live.
What is it we're listening to?
We're listening to radio, it's called RTLM. It's an extremist radio which was set up by the late president and his party to propagate ethnic division, Hutu-Tutsi division. And it preaches that the Hutus should eliminate the Tutsi and that the Tutsis should be cleared from the face of Rwanda. So they want to make the conflict Tutsi-Hutu so that the Hutus can feel that they're only fighting a small group of people, and that so far they have killed the majority of that small group, and they have to eliminate the remaining.
Why is it that you laugh so much about it? What amuses you about it?
It's because whatever they say is so extraordinary. It's not even. It's unreasonable. It's untrue. It's so funny to hear people talking about lies. You see, he doesn't know what to say. He's someone sitting on a microphone, paid just to make sure that the population is kept divided. So he says anything which comes. He has no program. They don't have programs.
It's just propaganda.
Propaganda. He says anything which comes into his head.
David Kabuye of the Rwandan Patriotic Front was talking to Peter George in 1994. As many as 1 million people may have been murdered in the Rwandan massacres. It was a time when radio was known as the messenger of death. On Radio National, this is The Great Marconigram with me, Tony Baldwin.
Ear witness. The grain of the human voice.
Zur Feier der 11. Olympiade neuer Zeitrechnung als eröffnet.
That was Herr Hitler announcing it open. Now they're all cheering him, and the whole crowd have raised their right arms. Now this is the hymn, the Olympic hymn, and there is Bishop Stoke is conducting it. Here comes the runner. He's got his torch. He's a fair young man in white shorts, running in. He's beautifully made. A very fine sight as an athlete. He's running by all the officials. People are waving their hats at him. He's holding it high in his right hand. Seems to be
holding it just enough to keep it from... It's burst into flames. Get it started. It's flashing terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's bursting into flames and it's falling on the mooring mast and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's flashing 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. We just hit a Messerschmitt. Oh, that was beautiful. He's coming right down now. There's the Spitfire. There are about 4 fighters up there, and I don't know what they're doing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fighters fighting right over our head now. There's one coming right down on the tail of what I think is the Messerschmitt. I think it's Spitfire behind him.
It will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route. There's numerous people running up the hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Simmons Freeway. Several police officers are rushing up the hill at this time. Stand by just a moment, please.
Everyone's supposed to remember where they were when John Kennedy was shot in 1963. Even people who never heard the broadcast or weren't even born.
A severe gunshot wound.
There's a shot. Oswald has been shot. A shot rang out. Mass confusion here.
It's not only the sound of the horror that makes the radio report real. It's the unguarded exclamation of the professional eyewitness, the "oh my God" emotion that comes direct to the listener. A human being's watching it for you, putting the grain of the human voice straight into your ear.
He was in the caravan.
The assaulting troops will begin to cross the Rhine.
Australians have often been there first.
Both guns and the machine guns which were firing tracer bullets over its service have stopped.
Chester Wilmot crossing the Rhine in 1945.
Both guns which here are firing single shots to guide the buffaloes up to the water's edge.
APC.
Tank.
No, not tank. Soldiers inside. Carry soldiers.
Bomb.
Just small gun up there. Anyway, it's had it. Had it now.
Philip Jack in Afghanistan in 1980. The current affairs reporter has become a specialist in the art of the radio parachute drop into a crisis. The ABC's Peter Kay.
I'm walking towards one of those trucks now. In the front of the truck, in the cab, there are 3 very scared-looking young soldiers.
I can remember after Tiananmen Square coming back and listening to some of the tapes later and saying, is that really my voice? Because my voice had changed. I was breathless. I was feeling very nervous. You could hear it in my voice, but I didn't realise at the time I was doing that. It was just a perfectly natural.
This is vk3sl. We're listening to a history of radio from the ABC, probably back in the 90s. And now we'll continue with side 2 now.
C. Dits are the dots and dars are the dashes.
F. Da-da-dit. G. Dit-dit-dit-dit. H. Dit-dit.
You could almost tell their personalities by the way they sent messages.
Da-da-dit. Da-da-da.
Try to imitate the sounds as closely as possible.
Da-da-da. Da-da-da.
You could tell their nationalities. Germans were slow, very correct. French and Italian, they went like the Blazers. Egyptians, very peculiar style. The Americans varied. You couldn't tell an American.
A-E-R-I-A-L. Ariel?
I used to listen to the Emden, the Gear and the Comet, all German battleships. And I got to know the fist of every operator aboard every one of those ships.
That's Culliver. I can always tell his B's. By jingo, he's coming in louder than I've ever heard him.
Now, when the war broke out, I was able to telegraph to the Navy office in Melbourne the secret call signs, which was 2 letters, of every ship, because I knew the fist of the man. As soon as he put his hand on the key, I knew what ship he was on.
And out of this bedlam, broadcasting was born.
Dot space dash dot space dash dot dash dot dash dash dot space dot space dash dash dash. What? It was dot dash dash. Do it again because you stuffed up.
Hi, my name's Michelle Wilson. I'm from 1st Rebel Force Scout Troop. I'm actually at Jota right now at Bowl Mountain.
Okay. We're from North Richmond.
Scouts. We're at Jota.
In our tents of Pigsty.
Yes.
Hi, this is Lewis from First Class Lady of Scouts.
Hello, Emily, over.
And I'm at Jota. Jamboree of the Air.
Jamboree of the Air.
Jota means
Jamboree of the Air.
Jamboree of the Air.
How are you, Emily?
October 2001.
Ray doesn't like Limp Bizkit.
Yes, he does.
No, he doesn't.
Yes, he does.
No, he doesn't.
Yes, he does.
No, he doesn't.
We talk over radios to people around other scouts around the world. Yes, he does. At Jota, we talk on the radio or we talk on the internet.
We went on the air and talked to people on the two-way radio.
Scouts come along.
Yeah, and they speak to other scouts around.
And I actually talked to someone from England.
On the radio.
They were quite cheerful.
Eminem and Limp Bizkit.
You're on the 8. What are you doing listening to that stuff?
I like it.
I like it. What's your favourite TV show?
I'm not sure. Some person called Andrew or something. He lived in Blacktown. I talked to a girl called Brittany, and she was 18.
Hello, Sheree. I'm Alex.
How old are you?
I'm 12. What about you?
I'm 16.
She lied. What grade are you in?
Year 10.
Me too.
I thought you were only 12 years old.
I'm a genius. I was put through kindergarten when I was in nappies and accelerated to Oxford University.
Oh yeah, I believe you.
Yep, and you go around and do a lot of bases.
We also do different kinds of bases.
Morse code.
Electrical first aid. Things like treasure hunt, Morse code.
Breaker.
Like Morse code. First aid was fun.
And you make a metal detector.
Metal detector.
Oh yeah, I did do a bit of that.
Dot.
Start again, they're going too fast.
Ready?
Start again. Okay, dash. Dash. Dot. Dash. W. Dot.
What?
Hello, I think it's supposed to say.
Hello.
I can't read yours. It's meant to be touching.
Where does number 2 go?
Made these little kit things.
Can we solder it?
We do kits. This year we're making an amplifier.
You make a listening device.
So point it at someone and you can hear what they're saying.
Guns and you pull the trigger.
Actually from a water pistol.
The earphones in, you put them in your ear.
You can hear people 20 metres away.
Sort of good for eavesdropping.
Like they don't even know you're talking to them.
Can I do it?
Did it shoot you?
Almost. Oh, yes, I did it.
There's 2 people or 1 person in and they go around and hide, and the other people get the walkie-talkies, walk around, and if one person sees them, they communicate with the others to try and catch them. Repeat that again, I can't hear. Okay, let's go get them. Okay, we're coming. Bradley!
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
And we do lots of other stuff too.
You have a lot of fun.
Like stuff.
Sometimes we just camp, and tonight we'll be watching a movie called The Dish.
With you. Over.
End of message.
In the beginning, the boy genius of the airwaves.
When he was a boy, Marconi started experimenting sending radio signals between the garden and an attic at the Villa Grifone, his ancestral home near Bologna.
My name is Barbara Valotti. I am the curator here of the Marconi Museum. This is Villa Grifone, and this is the house where Guglielmo Marconi grew up and where he made his first experiments in wireless telegraphy in 1895. At that time he was only 21.
While we think of Marconi as Italian, his mother was heiress to the Jameson-Irish whiskey family, so he had fair hair and blue eyes, was partly educated in England and spoke impeccable English. Robin Ravlich visited the Marconi Museum at the Villa Grifone, where she discovered a treasure chest of Marconi's early technology, including the old master's voice.
The lights have just gone out for the moment, because yes, they're back on. Now, perhaps instrumental to that discovery, I see over there a gun, a rifle.
That gun is certainly part of Marconi's legend. The transmitter and the receiver were at that point out of sight. The way Marconi and his collaborators decided to show that the experiment was a successful one was to shoot a gun. So it is often said that radio was born through a gunshot.
I don't know if you know the story about this particular Villa Grifone, but you might have seen the window up there, which is where Guglielmo Marconi sat doing his first transmission, because he was convinced that the radio sounds would not shoot off into space, but would in fact follow the curvature of the Earth. And behind us there's quite a steep hill, and apparently one of the workmen at the time was sent the other side of the hill with his grandson, who in actual fact is the father of a gentleman who still works in the grounds here. And William Marconi sent the signal, and the gentleman, the gamekeeper or whatever he was, the other side of the hill, had to fire off his gun when the machinery he was left with responded to Marconi's signal. And that's proved to Marconi that sounds didn't shoot off up into space, but in fact would follow the curvature of the Earth. It went over the hill and went down and activated the machinery the other side of the hill.
What a day it's been for Marconi. Magic moments.
Hi, I'm Dominic Longo, captain of the Marconi Stallions, and you're listening to the Great Marconi-gram on Radio National.
The Marconi Museum. From Morse code to Marconi phone.
Okay, this is the transmitter. Then we have a Morse key, obviously, a spark coil, an oscillator, and batteries, electric batteries. And when we press the Morse key, for example, this was more or less the three dots corresponding to the letter S. For the first 20 years, radio communication was radio telegraphy. I mean, it took 20 years before voice could be broadcast.
This is a test
I always stress
vk3sl.
as a key element the fact that he grew up perfectly bilingual. Actually, I should say that maybe his English was a bit better than his Italian, because his Italian has always had a bit of an English accent.
Various experiments I had always held a belief, amounting almost to an intuition.
All'inizio, cioè dei miei primi esperimenti, io ebbi la forte intuizione, direi quasi la visione chiara e sicura,
che le trasmissioni radiotelegrafiche sarebbero state
We're looking at a very old book here in the library. Is this the library?
Yes, we also have a library and an archive, and this book dates back from 1897, and it's the first interview Marconi gave in his career. The description that the journalist made, it gives us a picture of this young man with no official schooling in his background. He has very calm and serious manner. I don't know if you say that. He's very precise when he talks, and all these things make people think that he's older than he actually is. He never shows himself as a scientist, and he simply says that he has observed facts and invented instruments daring to present a new invention, and he was successful because very soon he patented it and he founded a company. In that way he started his amazing career abroad.
The personal one-to-one relationship between the listener and the broadcaster.
Sonntagnachmittag zu Hause.
Sie zu Hause, wir hier im Studio. Anywhere there's a radio. And a listener, the listener, and the radio, and a listener, and the broadcaster.
Still talking. Sitting comfortably.
Zu Hause,
talking.
Studio, the radio, broadcaster.
Still.
Just now it's on the radio.
In the decades after the first message crossed the Atlantic, the world was gradually exposed to every possible form of sound, fury, or seductive message by radio. Weather reports, news bulletins, music, sport, drama, eyewitness accounts of tragedy and war, documentary reality, propaganda, talkback, and, of course, advertising commercials.
Radio is everywhere with the people. Everyone listens to radio. Working girls listen to a favorite baritone.
Businessmen listen, relaxing at home. It's the most versatile sound around. AWA Cruiser 9, the radio that goes anywhere.
It costs so little to look lovable.
11 way-out styles in new materials.
And very pointed. With their new 1937 true-to-life radio receiver.
Stay a while
on the top of the dial.
For the sound of music.
There ought to be a better word than delicious.
Smoke, you filter, and you'll smoke easy. Now comes the news that every radio listener's been hoping to hear.
Let me tell you that morphine is the greatest killer of flies and insect pests ever known.
First on your radio dial.
Country Life tastes its best anytime you smoke one.
Geared to match your high-pressure pace.
Working people listen.
Business people listen.
Everyone listens to radio.
And then here we have probably the most important one this year, because together with the receiver that Marconi used in Newfoundland, we have the hands-on version so that everybody can hear what Marconi heard in Newfoundland, St. John's.
There seemed to be some doubt that this experiment actually succeeded.
Yes, there were scientists that thought, first of all, that it was impossible that radio waves could overcome the curvature of the Earth. And also they said that probably Marconi was confusing the 3 dots of the Morse code with the electrical discharges that are always in the atmosphere. Marconi was sure that he heard that signal, and to prove that, the following year, actually, I would say the following months, he started a campaign with a liner with the Philadelphia, and on board the ship, experiments, transmissions, and he received signals even at bigger distances than the one that there is between Poldhu and St. John's. So thanks to those experiments, there were no doubts anymore. But I would add that many people were convinced that Marconi was also sincere and right also at St. John's, Newfoundland.
12:30 noon. What was that? A little click. Several. Regularly. The letter S. And again. Marconi heard them for some time before he trusted himself to hand the telephone to Kemp for corroboration. Could he hear anything? Yes, he could. The tremendous expanse of ocean had been bridged.
Here we also have a copy of the notebook where Marconi recorded all his experiments of the very first days of December in St. John's, and even if it is not very clear, on Thursday the 12th, obviously December 1901, he finally wrote down signals at 12:30, 1:10 and 2:20. These were the three moments in which he and Mr. Camp received the signals that were being sent from Poldhu.
It was shortly after midday on December the 12th, 1901, that I placed a single earphone to my ear and started listening. The receiver on the table before me was very crude. A few coils and condensers and a coherer. No valves, no amplifiers, not even a crystal. I was at last on the point of putting the correctness of all my beliefs to test. The chief question was whether wireless waves would be stopped by the curvature of the Earth.
It took another year before signals could be sent from the American continent to Europe. And then it took another year before the communication could be, this could be done in both directions. I mean, at the same time, Europe to America, America to Europe. The way they communicate with Poldhu, obviously telling Poldhu, first we are not getting the signals, and then finally, yes, we did, were by cables, by telegrams. Finally, there was a telegram with good news, but because there was also a lot of secretness about around this experiment, that for Marconi, the Marconi company meant a lot. Marconi invested all the money of the company on this experiment, so it was really a very crucial one.
Before we got television in the 1950s, radio was the most popular and powerful medium, and in recognition of Marconi's achievement, it was known by countless millions simply as the wireless.
Rechtsextremistische Terroristen.
5 leftist terrorists.
Terrorist attack
Has been assassinated by gunmen.
One of the gunmen was killed and the others kept fire.
Terrorist attack. Reports from Putsche.
Intelligence reports suggest Prime Minister...
By the way, these excerpts we hear from scores of different radio stations were compiled in 1983 by a Dutch radio maker, Ferdinand Krivet, for an extraordinary piece of creative cacophony broadcast by Westdeutsche Rundfunk. He called it Hörtext number 16. It was constructed from more than 3,000 separate fragments of tape recorded by people directly from their radios all over the world.
Good morning. Good morning to you, 1920.
Voilà, France Inter, il est 6 heures.
We'll revisit quite a few other great moments in world radio in the course of our own great Marconigram.
Good evening, Airman Jane Hendricks.
With me,
reporting.
Tony Baldwin, on Radio National.
And Fernand, how are you?
And you? Good afternoon, Stuart. Good afternoon.
Marconi knew from the start there was money in the air. He convinced the British Post Office and the armed forces to invest in his wireless technology, which he also patented through his own companies set up in Britain. The first sets were used for ship-to-shore communication, and they came with Marconi operators who sent out Marconigrams. The Atlantic was once more the scene of a Marconi triumph in 1910, when a Marconigram from the USS Montrose led to the capture of one of its passengers, the notorious British murderer Dr. Crippen. When he disembarked at Montreal, the Canadian Mounties were waiting for him. 2 years later came one of Marconi's greatest successes, and again the scene was the Atlantic. The disaster would have been even greater if Marconi operators hadn't been on board the Titanic.
An industrial version of the produced by the Marconi company of the magnetic detector was the receiver on the Titanic, and through the magnetic detector it was let's say easier to catch radiotelegraphic signals. It's not very well tuned. Yeah.
And the word Marconigram became a very famous one. It replaced a telegram in some way.
Exactly.
first I knew about it was about 11:30 at night. As I told you, I was asleep, and the night watchman came down, all hands were woke up, and we had to assemble in the second-class dining saloon. Then the chief steward came down, Archie Robinson, and he said, "Well, men, I've got very grave news." He said, "We have just received a Marconigram," they called it Marconigram in those days, "from the Titanic. She has struck an iceberg. The engine room's flooded, she's seriously disabled, and they're putting women and children into the lifeboats." Well, they just couldn't believe it.
It's a test transmission from
They swung out some of the boats,
vk3sl.
put cargo clusters over the side of lights. They got all blankets ready, put the coffee urns on, and everything was ready to rescue any people that were coming in boats and that. And everybody wanted to do something. Well, the men said, right, they went down the stoke hole to give the stokers a spell in dinner jackets to stoke up.
You mentioned, Mr. Todd, the Marconigram. Now, I think I'm right in saying that when the Titanic went down, it's the first time that the SOS was used.
Absolutely.
And you didn't call them wireless operators, you called them...
No, we called them Marconi operators. They were viewed with suspicion by most ships' captains. They thought there was something very, very suspicious, really, about a man being in a little cabin and tapping a key and sending messages out over the ether. And the ship's captains didn't like that. They didn't know what they were sending out. They wanted to be in a sort of thing.
Can you say what a Marconigram is?
I would define it as a telegram received through radio instead of cables.
In 1918, Marconi sent a message from North Wales to Sydney. Again, it was in Morse. This time, a short speech from Prime Minister Billy Hughes, calling on young men to volunteer for service in the Great War, which was, as it happens, not far from its conclusion. Again in 1930, a Marconi signal travelled halfway across the world, this time to switch on the lights of Sydney's Town Hall. But, as we'll hear later, the Australian connection to Marconi involved a lot more than bright sparks and radio waves.
The year 1920 is memorable for a number of important wireless telephone transmissions which had both news and entertainment value and thus had the same character that broadcasting has today. To encourage public interest, demonstrations were given to show that no special skill was required to talk into the telephone and that musical items could be transmitted and satisfactorily received with ease. In February 1920, a program of vocal and instrumental music for 2 half-hourly periods each day for a fortnight was broadcast from the Chelmsford station using about 5 kilowatts in the area and the same wavelength of 2,800 meters which was being employed by Paul Joule for the news broadcast to ships. This was in order to test the range of the transmitter. Amateurs and shipping companies were advised and asked to send in reports. Dame Nellie Melba gave her first broadcast in June 1920 from this station. Interest was aroused by these broadcast concerts, and good reception was reported from distances as far away as Persia and Canada.
I read in the paper
that Dame Nellie Melba was coming to sing. So I wrote to Marconi's and asked them if I could go and hear her sing. And they very kindly wrote back and said that I could. So I was actually present when she did sing at Marconi's, and that was her first broadcast.
It must have been really exciting to watch Dame Nellie Melba at work.
Oh, it was, and I felt that it was very kind of the Marconi Company to allow me to go, because it was only for myself. I couldn't take anyone with me. She had a grand piano, and there were two gentlemen accompanists. She had a microphone on a stand, and also there was a carpet on the floor, but she didn't want the carpet. She said, no, I don't want that. She preferred to stand on the ordinary floor, which of course I suppose is quite understandable because the carpet would take the sound.
And what was her voice like?
Oh, well, very beautiful, very beautiful.
Dame Nellie Melba sang into a telephone microphone amplified with a horn made of a cigar box. And, antique though the exhibits at the Villa Grifone undoubtedly are, some of them still work. A Marconi phone wireless made in 1922 can still be tuned to pick up medium-wave transmissions today.
Ecco poi radio in London. Marconi phone. G. Marconi.
There's another sentence, I don't know if you want to read it, in which Marconi described the huge development of broadcasting, if you want to read it.
So he says, it is both my belief and earnest hope that these Marconi phones, the latest popular development of the principles of my invention, may benefit the public at large by providing every home in the land with a new medium for education and entertainment.
They were called Marconi phones at the beginning, so this says a lot, I mean, in terms of Marconi's legacy to many, as I said, developments in radio communications.
So this is, in fact, the Marconi phone V2A type RB1B long-range model, and it's dating from 1922, but still capable of...
Yes, we can listen to it. It's original, and it's one of the very first ones produced by the Marconi company, and that company was the first one in the world.
But the signal we'll get is one from our year, exactly. 2001.
Exactly.
In this moment, listening, broadcasting Rai. 1922. Molto vecchio. Ancora funziona.
So it was made in 1922, it's very old, but it still functions. So what is the message for today that we're hearing?
Guess what? They are talking about the Twin Towers. But anyway, the fact is that every time we put this on, we catch something which is being broadcast right now. And this is done thanks to this 1922 radio. We don't know of any other radio, I mean so old, still functioning. And we are pretty proud of this piece in our museum.
Must have been his feelings at this supreme moment. The achievement constituted an epoch in human history. The lives of millions of every race and creed would be affected as from this hour. The commercial possibilities were incalculable. The mitigation of loneliness was certain. Continents would speak with each other of their several aspirations. A ship in distress in the perilous wastes of the seas could be succored. Lovers, separated by a hemisphere, would confer privily and be comforted. Empire builders, isolated in desert and jungle, would hear the sounds of their cities and be cheered and refreshed. A new world would be born.
E T H E R.
This is vk3sl. You're listening to A History of Radio. I think it was produced by Radio National. It's a social history. And I quite favour that montage approach. I think it's quite captivating. It's certainly not a technical appraisal, but, it's great. It's got a life of its own. There's one more tape, but I need to preview it first. I'm not sure what's on this tape, and I'm not 100% certain it's what we're looking for. So what I can do is see if the trough line will give us a feed from our local ABC FM. Let's have a look. Classic FM, auxiliary. Let's have a listen. Okay, we'll just make this a short interlude while I just check out the tape. vk3sl, and looks like the next tape is okay. I think it's the right thing. It is labelled as such, but we should always test first. So let's continue this fascinating series put out probably sometime in the 1990s, I think, and it's from some dubbings made of ABC Radio National on cassette, found this afternoon. Anyhow, we are switched in and we are ready to go. vk3sl.
There's a body there. Oh, I could smell something. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bodies there. Just thrown there. This young fella with a beard. Shot to the head. Sorry about that. The smell was disgusting of the... And there's just more bodies than 5. There's lots. They're all down the road and all down the side of the road. And they're 4 or 5 days old. Oh.
Hell, that was a bottle that just flew past, shattered just in front of my face.
Marius Webb of the Star Hotel riot in Newcastle in 1979.
Oh, I don't believe this! Police cars have just been set alight. Someone's chucked a match on the petrol that came out of the police car that I was describing earlier. It's an inferno of one paddy wagon and one police car in front of the Hunter District Water Board. there anybody in it? Get away because it's likely that this police car will blow up. This is the most extraordinary.
Distinguishing features. The Actuality Field documentary.
I was a headhunter at that time. I was quite a lonely figure with my conception how a radio documentary should be made, not written. And I was looking for these rare personalities capable of composing information, writing with the ears, these journalists of sound.
Peter Leonard Brown and the quest for more than reportage, the authentic radio documentary.
אולי אתה יודע איפה גליל? גליל. אם הורידו אותו למקלט ההוא.
Sound production was something like to be a sculptor, like not constructing something out of bones, but out of the flesh of something.
זה לא כדאי בכלל.
She's saying it isn't worth risking your life for just recording this.
Leo Brown founded the International Feature Conference in the 1970s to encourage radio documentary makers to go out and record the world as it is, on the West Bank of Jerusalem, or the mountains of Croatia.
Parallel to the world of sounds, there is the world of silence or stillness, with its own sense and value. Silence or stillness is what we call the good earth, the soil of our trade. This one here, the pathetic symphony of old Lika Starolichka Patetichna, is based on a mountainous part of Croatia, and listening to it you need an inner silence as well.
Starolička, patetična, čede price Zvonimira Bajsića i Maksima Jurjevića. Radio Zagreb. Umjetnički program.
Westdeutsche Rundfunk mit Nachrichten.
50 Atomkraftwerke sollen in der Bundesrepublik während der nächsten 10 Jahre errichtet werden. Jedes einzelne kann eine Millionenstadt mit Strom versorgen. 1985 soll in der Bundesrepublik die Hälfte des dann benötigten Stroms...
God's on the air. Heaven on the wireless.
Calling, say kill. 2X2L calling, say kill. 2X2L calling, say kill, New York. Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone? 2X2L calling, say kill.
50 Atomkraftwerke sollen in der Bundesrepublik während der nächsten 10 Jahre...
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Hier spricht die Stimme der Energie. Ich bin ein riesiger elektrischer Generator.
Sometimes the gods descend to earth. Some of radio's most shocking moments have been when kings and emperors have chosen or been told to speak directly to their subjects.
Ich bin ein riesiger elektrischer Generator.
This is Windsor Castle, His Royal Highness Prince Edward. A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as King and Emperor. You all know the reasons which have impelled me to renounce the throne. But I want you to understand that in making up my mind, I did not forget the country or the empire.
Und ihr Herr zugleich. Deshalb hütet mich gut, mich, den Genius der Energie.
The Japanese Emperor Hirohito's only radio appearance on August the 15th, 1945, recorded off shortwave by US forces. Commentators had to explain to Japanese listeners what he meant. It was they, not the emperor, that said the war had been ended by divine intervention.
Dignity and the seal of Catholic faith, and as thou art this day consecrated to be our head and prince, so may you continue steadfastly as the defender of Christ's religion, that being rich in faith
this opportunity of telling you how delighted we both were by the spectacular greeting given to us this morning by the yachtsmen in the harbour and by the citizens on shore. I have always looked forward to my first visit to this country, but now there is the added satisfaction for
A great battle. Rainlover's got his head in front. Allsop battling back. Rainlover's got him beaten. He's going to win his second in a row.
It's Rainlover to beat Allsop. And you can hear the assembled cheers as he goes down on one knee and fields.
Cricket has filled more hours of radio than any other sport. But the game that can go on for days without a result seems to lose its mystique when you can see it on television.
I've heard some people crabbing.
Radio is a much lighter form of cricket than television, which is so serious and gets so far up itself. So I've never been able to resist poking fun either at my fellow commentators or if I see something funny on the field, having a laugh at it. So television won't touch me with a barge pole. I don't blame them either.
The veteran English commentator Henry Blofeld.
The game is never the same without the wireless.
Commercial radio once tried to make radio cricket even more visual.
3AW had the rights, And it was felt that they ought to do it differently, and it was felt that most of the audience didn't have a clue where mid-off, mid-on, and mid-wicket and extra cover and all the other positions were. So they thought they'd do it by the hands of the clock, so which would meant that the bowler was bowling at 12 o'clock and the batsman was batting at 6 o'clock. And it produced one great story, because Harry Beitzel was on the air, and suddenly a wicket fell, and he said Jav had been caught at mid-off, and he said he'd been caught there at 1 o'clock, or was it 1:30? No, maybe a 1:45. And it took him quite a debate with himself as to where the exact position was. I think he eventually found it was about 3:05 or whatever it was. And then he handed back to the studio for the news, and the announcer in the studio said, thanked Harry Beitzel very much, he said, for that fascinating commentary. And the chap who was out 3:15, or was it 2:25, I really can't remember which. But he said, anyway, he said, I'm now just about to read you the deep fine leg news.
I have been asked to explain to you how the synthetic ball-by-ball descriptions are broadcast by the national stations. Let us follow the course of a typical message as received in the Commission's Sydney studios only a minute after the actual happening on the test ground in England.
The first ball-by-ball commentary in Australia of an Ashes series in England in 1938 was a fake. The ABC's Charles Moses explains the principle of synthetic cricket.
As the shot is made, the effects man, who has in front of him a copy of the cable message, drops the needle on an effects record, and listeners hear the applause of the crowd as the shot reaches the boundary. And now, let us listen in.
Barnes turns, runs in, volley to Bradman. It's ball well pitched, Bradman moves forward, drives. Cotton at cover tries to cut it off, but is beaten by the pace of the ball, and it races away for another 4. 4 more to Bradman, taking his score to 101. A century in 130 minutes, a glorious innings by us, and Australia is now building herself in a very sound position, assisted by a great knock by Bradman.
Hi, I'm Lee Sterry, coach of the Marconi Stands, and you're listening to the great Marconi Graham on Radio National.
It's Norway 2, England 1. What a fabulous night for football.
The Marconi name will never die while there are other goals to be scored. When the Sydney Marconi Sports and Recreation Club was founded in the 50s, it was supposed to embody the Marconi spirit.
Body, turn. Yeah, go on. Get across him, get across him. The atmosphere is electric. For the first time this afternoon, the fans get a sight of their heroes.
I am Argo Benedetti. I'm one of the founders of Club Marconi. When we had to name this club, and a whole lot of proposals were put forward. Leonardo da Vinci, that's another great scientist, way ahead of his time. Galileo.
The faces of those Marconi players say it all.
And I remember them one day asking me what I thought about the name of Marconi, and I said, excellent. There is no better representative in the world than Marconi.
Time. Yeah. Stay in there, Meigs. Meigs, Boisier, tuck. Tuck. Is that tucking? Stay there. Get men behind the ball. Inge, keep working. Rexy.
Put ourselves back in the situation of the early 50s. We were all migrants. And there was in a lot of cases, a lack of communication. There was no television, of course. The only way you could communicate or listen to your homeland or the music or the politics, call it what you like, was through radio. Why not name it after a man that communicates for everybody? And that was the reason. He didn't invent radio for the Italians. He invented it for everybody. You keep going straight to go to Liverpool. Now, just as you get past Smithfield, don't go over the bridge. There's a roundabout with an overpass. That's Poldridge.
Chance to use his pace, and he's got to go, and he's got a yellow card, and he's off. He's sent off in the 39th minute.
I'm sure he's here. Oh, yeah, hang on a second. Oh, yes, yes,
Time,
yes,
body.
yes.
Body, touch. Yep, touch and go.
Yes, that's
Get it
it.
out of here. Got it. Open. Movement.
Yes, hang on a second.
Release, turn. Open, you bloke. Marconi-Stevsky. Surely that must be the winner. Those Marconi fans go crazy. The goal coming 2 minutes into stoppage time. Celebrations on the Marconi bench.
You do get emotional, don't you?
Yes, I do, because I relive certain moments. You know, what has happened, how it's happened. You must realise that it's going back 45 years, my involvement in Marconi. And very, very seldom that I get to express myself like this. So obviously, when things flood back to your mind, you express yourself in the typical gesticulating Italian, you know?
Do you have a favourite moment in the club's history as a soccer club?
No, not really, no. I don't follow soccer very much at all. No.
You don't follow soccer very much?
No. I don't like prima donnas.
Go on, 2 of you.
This is a test transmission from vk3sl.
Jesus Christ. You're standing here holding mine. But there's the final whistle. Marconi, the minor premiers, have won the grand final. They retained the trophy they won last season.
The logo, the Marconi logo, is a shield, you know, encompassing everything that Marconi stands for.
Hugs there for the players. It was a dramatic finish.
Well, the shield consisted of a map of the world with all the parallels and meridians, a boomerang in the center of it, and a radio tower, which meant Marconi contacting the whole world with his radio, and of course Australia with a boomerang.
Now we go. Forcing that way, King. Forcing that way, yeah. Megzi!
Specialmente all'elettrotecnica e allo studio delle onde hertziane. Frequentò il laboratorio fisico della...
Do you think Marconi gets the recognition he deserves?
No, definitely not. But then if we recognise the past, the present becomes more comparable, but we want to be proud now. Who wants to know about the old fuddy-duddies? That's nature.
The trophy will stay at Club Marconi for another 12 months.
So I was going to ask you how you think the team would go this year.
Well, this year, I wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't have a clue, honestly.
Argo Benedetti, one of the founders of the Marconi Soccer Club.
What a day it's been for Marconi.
The most important event in my father's life, because for him the first transmission across the Atlantic was also to have a link between two continents.
The Australian wireless connection.
And so that was the beginning also of the communications with Australia, because he developed his transmissions and he began to communicate to Australia, and he never went to Australia, but he wished very much to visit Australia.
In her visit to the Marconi Museum at Bologna, Robin Ravlich met Marconi's daughter, the Principessa Elettra.
He sent a signal, I think, from his boat, Elettra.
Yes, that is the photograph over there. It was 1930, 26th of March, that he lit the lights from on board the yacht Elettra anchored in Genova, in Italy, the lights in Sydney Town Hall.
It gives me very great pleasure to be able to take some part in your ceremony today, since I directed the transmissions from the high-powered station at Carnarvon, which resulted in the conveyance of the first direct wireless telegraph message to reach Australia from England and Europe.
Well, I'm Shirley Fitzgerald. I'm the city historian for the City of Sydney, and we're just going now into a room in Town Hall House behind the Town Hall in Sydney, which is called the Marconi Room.
Shirley, Marconi's name has popped up all over the world, but what on earth is it doing in the town hall?
Well, Marconi's got a very close link with the town hall because he was in contact with Fisk, who was involved with the AWA for many, many years. And in fact, the first radio communication between Sydney and England was way back in 1918 during the war, when I believe it was Billy Hughes, the Prime Minister, who did a rousing speech to the troops and so on. But on the 26th of March in 1930, and this is the direct connection with the town hall, there was an exhibition, an AWA Fisk organised exhibition, the inaugural meeting of the New South Wales Electrical and Radio Development Association. It was known as the Radio and Electrical Exhibition. In fact, I think this exhibition went on many years annually at the town hall, and a lot of people may remember it as a place that you would go as a social outing. But on this first one, all of the lights that were set up in the town hall, 2,800 lights, were lit by Marconi, who was sitting on his boat called Elettra on Genoa Harbour, and at the appropriate moment he flicked a switch over in Italy and the Sydney town hall lit up. In fact, it was quite funny because the Sydney town hall lit up 8 minutes too early, because the person here on the ground in Sydney who was to tell him over in Italy to do the deed got a bit excited and jumped the gun when the president of the association was still making a fulsome speech. So there was thunderous applause, the lights come on, and then everybody has to rush around and scurry and turn them all off again and send the message 8 minutes later. And so Marconi actually switched the lights on at the town hall twice.
That wasn't the only slip-up. Apparently they were having a few atmospheric problems with the transmission as well.
Yeah, in fact, as early as 1924, they'd experimented with direct beam to replace relay stations for transmitting. But on that particular occasion, and they'd done some tests, Fisk here and people over in Italy before that day, and it was decided, to put it in the pompous words of the Sydney Morning Herald, that the atmospheric variations at present prevailing suggested the advisability of doing it by the more traditional relay method. So in fact, the message went from the boat with Marconi on it to Dorchester and then to Grimsby in England and then through to Victoria, and the last 600 miles of it actually came by landline to Sydney. But it didn't matter because the whole thing was a stunt. It was to sell the idea of radio, and it all took less than a second. And for people in Sydney in 1930, that was just a fabulous sort of a point that you could get that message across the world, however many thousands of miles it is, in less than a second.
It was wonderful because my mother was close to him. I wasn't born yet, and it was a great, great event. My father, Marconi, and for Australia.
And apparently the event was restaged 50 years later.
Yeah, that's right. And that's something a lot of people don't know about. In 1980, which was the 50th anniversary of this event here, they reenacted the whole thing to trigger off a fireworks display and a lighting up of the Opera House and the bridge. That, as I understand it, was a very big deal for Italy. And on the Italian side of this particular event, there was a 40-minute telecast where the Prime Minister of Italy spoke and the Pope spoke, because not only is it 50 years since it lit up Sydney Town Hall, it's also 50 years of the first direct connection between Italy and Australia. And apparently here, as I understand it, those who'd been invited to the event at the Opera House saw all of this, but the rest of us didn't. But we all saw the fireworks.
This is the Great Marconigram, celebrating 100 years of radio on Radio National.
Over a considerable period, in fact, since the closing years of the last century, I had striven to give the world improved and cheaper means of communication by electrical transmissions through space.
When I was researching and preparing this radio series I did called Bright Sparks in the late 1980s, I realised how misled I'd been about the history, the early history of radio. I had this heroic vision of Marconi as this person single-handedly inventing radio. So Marconi was a real hero for me. When I came to actually do really deep research, talking to a lot of the people in Australia who were actually involved in the early days of radio, I got a totally different perspective. And I stumbled across this chap called Father Shaw, who was just this amazing character. It made me think, why didn't I know about this guy? Father Slattery, a priest in Bathurst, around the same time as Marconi's kind of setting up the wires in Cornwall and Newfoundland to send that signal across the Atlantic. Father Slattery is busily getting his science class to do similar things across the fields of central New South Wales.
The ABC's Stephen Rapley, producer of the Bright Spark series on the early days of radio in Australia.
Radio hams, great and small.
The ABC presents The Ham, being a tribute to the amateur enthusiast whose experimental and developmental work in radio has played such a notable part in communication and broadcasting.
It's marvellous to be able to converse with people all over the world. People different to yourself with something new to say. It broadens your outlook, increases your knowledge of things. The world is my oyster.
Way back in 1908, I can remember when all we could use was the brass staircase rods for the transmitter with spark coils for exciting, and for the receiver we also used brass staircase rods.
Early on, back in the 20s and early 30s, in a lot of cases you had to make your parts because you couldn't buy them.
First crystal set I made myself. I think it consisted of rotary switches, all handmade, and the knobs were screw tops off bottles of hair oil filled up with sealing wax.
Born for a cocoa tin for the coil with a few scrap parts that he had around the place.
Safety razor blades mounted in a piece of wood, and you gently rest a piece of carbon out of a pencil.
Used Meccano set to make brackets.
Foil that used to come off chocolates, well, you could cut that into little squares and put bits of tissue paper in between. Dip the tissue paper in candle wax and then put that in between and make yourself a capacitor.
I even used sacks of salt cardboard containers to wind coils on.
The contacts on the board were paper clips.
I made the tuning condensers out of some test tubes that I got from Elliott Brothers. Two tins like jam tins, one a little bit smaller than the other, and rig up a skewer through one of them so you could turn it. That was, one way around not having the 4 and 6 or whatever it was to buy a capacitor.
I erected an enormous aerial in the back house from the top of a tree onto the chimney of the house, and I was on my own from nearly every suburb, had its radio club, and boys wouldn't miss that for the world. I know there was a radio club not far from us, and rain, hail or snow, we'd go.
In my mother's laundry, and I had to take it down when she wanted to do the washing because it occupied so much space.
The Ham. This is their proud story.
The amateurs were fantastic. They were broadcasting before the traditional broadcasters came along. They actually helped define the form.
It's a marvellous invention radio is. It's opened up completely new horizons for me. Friends all over the world. All over the world. None in this country, but all over the world. A brand new hobby for the enterprising enthusiasts every age has known. They call themselves the Ham. This is GLK London transmitting on the shortwave band on 10.4 metres at a frequency of 250 megacycles per second. This is GLK London calling HB24D. Radio owes much to the Ham. It owes everything. Because, of course, the first ham was Marconi. Marconi. Williamo.
There were many people, some I am afraid of high technical achievement, who discounted my idea.
I was shocked at how much in control Marconi and their Australian affiliate, AWA, Australian Amalgamated Wireless of Australasia, how much in control of the history they had been.
I could not be satisfied until my theories and ideas have been put to a practical test.
I think I can say that AWA will be right behind you in the test, and you can call on us for any special equipment you'll need. And so the ambitious plan was launched.
I found Mr. Fisk, who is with you now, ready to bring to the experiment.
Thoughts and words of mankind to the four corners of the world.
They actively excluded from any of their narratives about radio, wireless, any mention of anyone who hadn't actually used
radio valves made by AWA or by the Marconi company. And so you don't get a contested sense. You don't get a sense that there's a lot of other things happening.
If you will send us the name and address of a friend who you think would appreciate the fine qualities of a Marconi phone, we will gladly send you free of charge.
Talking to the mainland, or amateur broadcasters in one country, talking to their friends overseas.
Saludos. Look at you, look at you, look at you. A triumph of technological engineering. A work of art. They can keep their Sistine Chapels. Give me the inside of a wireless set any day.
On Radio National, this is The Great Marconigram with me, Tony Baldwin. Marconi was so gung-ho about the power of radio, he thought wireless waves might one day transmit electricity. That may never happen, but with the prospect of the mobile phone connecting us to radio on the internet, listening to the wireless is coming back in.
The future is wireless.
Radio in many ways is gaining more currency, I think, because people are finding they can listen to the radio while they're doing visual things. A lot of people will listen to the radio while they're working on a computer or working with other bits of technology. You can't watch television while you're doing that, or watch a movie or watch a DVD. So radio, in terms of being background information, is there. The other thing that's happening, which I think is really exciting, is that as we move into, and this goes back to Marconi's concept of the wireless, the ability to transmit wirelessly. The next generation of mobile communications, the third generation, or 3G as it's been called, is all about wireless telecommunications, and we sort of have it now with the phone. But the ability to get lots and lots of information, almost to be immersed in information constantly, so it's totally pervasive, it's always there, always on, the whole 24/7 thing. Radio is already part of that, but it'll be integrated into a lot of the new technology and a lot of the new content that's being written. People are not necessarily going to watch a movie on their telephone or their personal digital assistant or whatever the new technology might be down the track. However, they want to get the information that radio can deliver, or the entertainment, as in music, that radio can deliver. So radio is probably better placed in terms of a lot of the new technology to deliver information. It's something that's done for over 100 years, and really we're not yet at the point with the hardware that television can deliver into a variety of different devices like radio can. So actually I think the golden age of radio is just about to be reborn, and I think we'll see some quite dramatic products arrive that integrate radio or radio technology or the kind of thing that radio delivers into them.
Technology prophet Peter Lucina.
The third one is digital radio, and that's the really interesting one. In a way, it's kind of radio with pictures, which sounds a lot like television, but it's not. It's very feature-rich radio. So while you were listening to the radio using the internet, you could actually access a variety of different bits of information. So, for example, if you heard a song you liked, you could find out what the song was. In fact, you would see the song cover on a LCD screen on your radio. You could be listening to a horse race and you could bet over the radio with it. So it's sort of interactive radio. And while it's not moving pictures, it's sort of a slideshow of pictures. You could download radio programs into a personal listening device. So you could gain your information from a variety of different sources. So if you liked certain programs on ABC radio, but you wanted to get something from the commercials and a bit of music from some of the FM stations and another report, a science report, at a different time on ABC, all of those things would be available, and you would access them, you would dial in and get that information as you needed it. It would be stored on this device and you would play it back when you needed it. So it's sort of radio on demand.
So we shouldn't be depressed? I don't think so. And as long as you are so warm and so direct as you are, you will find people listening to you, to your thoughts, and to your inner broadcast.
Good on you, Peter. Peter Leonard Brown, talking to Philip Adams.
It's a sentence by Marconi, and he wrote, "My inventions are meant to save humankind and not to destroy it." And this is particularly important maybe also in this particular moment in which we know that technology can be also used in a very bad way. For sure, Marconi has always seen his invention as a huge development and for the progress of the humankind.
Such was the reputation of Marconi around the world that when he died in 1937, hundreds of radio stations closed down for 2 minutes silence. As one of his biographers said, the world suddenly became as silent as it was before he started it all.
Isn't there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone on the air?
Hello?
Who is that, please?
The personal one-to-one relationship
Hello? 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 Isn't there anyone?
between the listener
Hello?
Hello?
and the broadcaster.
Anybody there?
Hello? 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 Hello?
Hello, you're on the air.
Alive.
It's one small step for man.
It's alive.
One giant leap for man.
It's alive.
Hello, CQ. Hello, CQ. This is London Call. Hello, Hello, CQ. Hello, CQ.
This is Radio Beijing of America from Washington. BBC News at 6 o'clock.
And the whole thing is in fairyland.
I'm going to set you free.
Freedom is the only one.
It isn't true. It isn't here. There's nothing between us and heaven. Gone. It's disappeared.
Hello? Hello?
There may be some atmospheric.
Come into the radio room every day.
I hope we haven't lost the line.
Have we made contact?
They've gone. They've disappeared. There may be some jamming.
And you have to say no.
There's nothing at all.
Hello?
There may be some oscillation.
We can try.
Hello?
This is 2 Emma Talk Rittle testing. This is 2 Emma Talk Rittle testing.
Hello, you're on the air.
All right now. Sorry, TQ, we had a slight technical hitch. Here is a news flash.
The President of the United States is dead.
The king is dead.
Hitler is dead.
His Majesty the King passed peacefully away.
John Lennon has been shot dead.
His Majesty
Sir Robert Menzies is dead.
Franco amor.
Elvis Presley has died.
President is
The
dead.
Princess of Wales is dead. I repeat that. I repeat.
The
Dead. The Princess is dead.
Elvis Presley is dead.
John Lennon
is dead.
All the humanity and all the tragedy feeling around it.
Unless the jaw.
The white flag is up.
A right to the head.
Everyone is falling like a baby.
Right to the body.
They're piling dead, wounded soldiers in our tunnels.
6, 7, 8. The men are in the ring. The fight is over on a technical knockout.
Radio.
This is a test transmission
Russell Stapleton's
from
Radio
vk3sl.
Alive or Dead.
Grazie alla radio di Marconi, c'è meno disoccupazione. Grazie alla radio di Marconi, si comunica fra tutte le...
I'm Tony Baldwin. I hope you've enjoyed the Great Marconigram, our tribute to the man we owe it all to.
Per le persone, viva Guglielmo Marconi, è un miracolo.
Very special thanks to the staff at ABC Radio Archives for their enthusiasm and energy finding the historical sounds you've heard in the Great Marconigram, and also to Screen Sound Australia. The Great Marconigram was devised and produced by Robin Ravlich, Tony Barrell and Russell Stapleton. Script by Tony Barrell. Sound engineers, Andrei Shabanoff, John Cochran and Russell Stapleton. Additional announcements, Lee Redfern. I'm Tony Baldwin.
For more information, have a look at our special Marconi website. You can get there through the Radio National homepage or direct to www.abc.net.au/RN.
There we go, that's it. And that must be from sort of it must be late 90s, because the internet was well and truly up and running, but it was a program called The Great Marconigram put together by Radio National at that time. Very entertaining, and I do like the pastiche approach it does it. It works for me. Not something that's too sort of dictatorial narrative. I like the way that ideas just sort of morph through soundscapes. So there we have it. That's the end. That's all there is for tonight. I've got to go back and finish cooking the dinner, and we'll finish off with our usual exit music. And just a reminder that Mr. Long has his missions tonight on 147.475 megahertz and the 2 meter band, and he starts at 9:30. Now I'll be simulcasting that on the streaming service, so have a listen if you want to on the Broadwave service. That's the place to go. And it works quite well, so I just have 2 meters patched in, and you can reference it there. So thoroughly recommend Mr. Long's missions. This is vk3sl saying cheers for now, and we'll be back, I'm sure. Cheers.